Imagine this, you've conquered most of Europe. Kings bow before you. Nations tremble at your name. You've won more battles than most generals could dream of fighting. You're Napoleon Bonaparte, and for a decade, you've been unstoppable. Then it all falls apart. You're exiled to a tiny island, watching your empire crumble from afar. But here's the thing about legends. They don't go quietly. 10 months later, you're back. The throne is yours again, and your enemies? They're absolutely terrified, but they're also ready. And in a muddy field in Belgium, on a Sunday in June 1815, everything you've built, everything you fought for, will come down to one final desperate throw of the dice. This is the story of Waterloo. The battle that ended an era and nearly didn't happen at all. Let me paint you a picture. April 1814. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, the man who redrew the map of Europe with blood and brilliance, has finally been beaten. A grand coalition of pretty much everyone he's ever annoyed, which is basically everyone, has forced him to abdicate. He's shipped off to Elba, this tiny Mediterranean island that's more of a glorified rock than a proper exile destination. Meanwhile, back in France, the Bourbon monarchy is restored. Louis XVIII waddles onto the throne, and with him come all the old aristocrats, the very people whose excesses had sparked the French Revolution 25 years earlier. You can imagine how popular that was. But Napoleon's not the sitting-around type, is he? Word reaches him on Elba that France isn't exactly thrilled with the return of the old regime. The French people, turns out, have very little love for the monarchy and its hangers-on. They're muttering his name in cafes, in barracks, in the streets. He also learned something rather interesting. At the Congress of Vienna, where all his enemies are supposedly carving up Europe like a Sunday roast, they're actually locked in bitter disputes, fighting amongst themselves over who gets what. Classic, so Napoleon decides to roll the dice. After just 10 months in exile, barely enough time to redecorate his house, he returns to France. And here's where it gets brilliant. The troops sent to arrest him? They rally to his cause instead. Can you imagine being the poor sod sent to capture Napoleon only to find yourself saluting him instead? Most of France follows suit within days. It's like he never left. But in Vienna, the coalition immediately puts aside their squabbling. They declare Napoleon an outlaw. Not just an enemy, mind you, but literally outside the law. They mobilize their forces for war, and Napoleon knows he's got to act fast. He can't sit back and wait for a coordinated invasion of France. That would be suicide. He needs to win a quick, decisive victory, then negotiate peace from a position of strength. Classic Napoleon, really. Always on the front foot. He sets his sights on the coalition armies within easiest reach. Prince Blucher's Prussian army and the Duke of Wellington's Anglo-Allied army, both camped rather comfortably in Belgium. Now, Napoleon's force is a match for either coalition army on its own, but if they join forces, he'll be heavily outnumbered. So his strategy is simple, brutal, and typically Napoleonic. Keep them apart. Defeat each in turn. Easy, right? Napoleon's army crosses the frontier near Charleroi, intending to drive a wedge between the two coalition armies. It's brilliant in its simplicity. Split your enemies, then crush them individually before they realize what's happened. The next day, Napoleon sends his left wing under Marshal Ney to take the crossroads at Cottebras. This isn't just any crossroads. Control it, and you control the movement of armies. Ney clashes with Wellington's army, which is still frantically scrambling into position. It's a right mess, actually. The Allied troops fight off a series of French attacks, and just barely by the skin of their teeth manage to hold their ground. That same day, Napoleon attacks Blucher's Prussian army with his main force near the village of Ligny. Blucher is 72 years old. 72, most people that age are thinking about retirement, maybe a nice garden. Not Blucher. He personally leads a cavalry charge, on horseback. At 72, his horse is killed under him and he only just escapes capture. The battle itself is an absolute slugging match. Brutal. No finesse, just raw violence. But the French emerge triumphant. The Prussian army retreats, but here's the crucial bit. It's not broken, it's battered, bruised, but not destroyed. Napoleon sends his right wing under Marshal Grouchy to keep them on the run, and turns his attention to Wellington's army. Wellington doesn't receive news of Blucher's defeat until the next morning. When he does, he orders a retreat through heavy summer showers. Lovely June weather, that. His army trudges 8 miles south of Brussels to a position near a little village called Waterloo. There, Wellington receives a promise from Blucher that the Prussians will march to his aid the next morning. So Wellington, brass ones on him, decides to stand and fight. He's chosen his battlefield with care. His troops are positioned behind a gentle ridge, which gives them some shelter from French cannon fire. Smart. His right flank is anchored on the farmhouse of Hougoumont, his center on the farm of La Haye-Sainte, and his left on the farm of Papelotte. All three are fortified and garrisoned with elite troops. Wellington's men need every advantage they can get. The opposing armies are roughly equal in size, about 70,000 men each. But Wellington's is a proper ragtag bunch. British redcoats, Dutch troops, German soldiers, many of whom have never seen combat before. They're going to have to hold off Napoleon's army of veterans until Prussian reinforcements arrive. If they can't, the battle's lost. Probably the war, too. No pressure then. Sunday, the 18th of June, 1815, dawns bright and fair. Napoleon has ordered Marshal Grouchy to pursue the Prussians and keep them busy whilst he defeats Wellington's army at Waterloo and opens the road to Brussels. Simple plan. Except it goes wrong almost immediately. It's Grouchy who gets pinned down fighting the Prussian rearguard at Waver, the main Prussian force. It eludes him completely and is already marching to Wellington's aid. Whoops! At Waterloo, Napoleon delays his attack. The ground's sodden from the previous day's rain, and he wants it to dry out a bit, which will make movement easier for his troops. Makes sense, right? But those lost hours will prove absolutely crucial. Costly doesn't begin to cover it. The battle begins around 11 in the morning when Napoleon orders a feint against Wellington's right flank at Hougoumont. It's a classic tactic. He hopes Wellington will commit his reserves here, drawing them away from the center where the main blow will fall. But Hougoumont's British and German defenders cling on desperately throughout the day. At one point, the French force their way through the main gate. It looks like it's all over. But then the gate slams shut behind them, trapping them inside, and every single intruder is killed. Wellington later calls it the decisive moment of the battle. That one gate, held by a handful of men. Around noon, 80 French cannons open fire against the main Allied line. The bombardment is horrific. Most of Wellington's men are out of sight on the reverse slope, but many cannonballs still find their mark, smashing bloody holes in the Allied ranks. The sound alone must have been deafening, terrifying. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Napoleon sends in his infantry. The French columns, thousands of men marching in formation, are met by disciplined musket fire. Then they're charged by British heavy cavalry. The French attack disintegrates. Napoleon's men are trying to save themselves from the crushing hooves and flashing sabers. It's chaos, absolute carnage. Scores of Frenchmen are ridden down and 2 of their famous eagle standards are captured. These aren't just flags, by the way. They're symbols of regimental honor. Losing them is utterly shameful. But the British cavalry, exhilarated by success, charge too far. Classic mistake. They become scattered, their horses blown. At their most vulnerable, they're countercharged by French cavalry and suffer terrible losses. Among the dead is Major General Sir William Ponsonby, commander of the Union Brigade. The same cavalry charge that seemed like a triumph moments earlier has turned into a disaster. Around 4 in the afternoon, Marshal Ney thinks he sees the Allies beginning to retreat. He doesn't, but he thinks he does, and that's what matters. He leads a massive cavalry charge to drive home what he believes is the advantage. But Ney is wrong, completely wrong. The Allied infantry are ready, formed in hollow squares with bayonets fixed. These formations are impregnable to cavalry. The French horsemen can't break in. They can only circle impotently, like sharks around a cage, until they retreat or are shot from the saddle. Ney's failure to support this attack with either infantry or artillery is a serious blunder. A properly combined arms assault might have broken through, but cavalry alone? Against prepared infantry? It's suicide. Meanwhile, Blucher's Prussians have begun to arrive. They capture the village of Plancenoit, threatening Napoleon's flank and forcing him to send precious reserves to recapture it. His forces are being stretched thinner and thinner. Around 6 in the evening, French infantry finally capture the farmhouse of La Haye-Sainte in the center of the battlefield. This is huge. It allows the French to bring forward artillery and blast the Allied squares from close range. They can't miss the closely packed formations, and casualties quickly mount. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. Wellington's army is being torn apart. It begins to seem that if they don't retreat, they'll simply be killed where they stand. But the situation for Napoleon is equally desperate. The Prussians are arriving in force. More and more of them flooding onto the battlefield like a dark tide. And he's running out of men to throw against Wellington's line. So he turns to his ultimate reserve. The elite Imperial Guard, the most feared troops in Europe. These are the veterans of veterans. Men who fought in every corner of the continent. Men who've never been defeated. At 7:30 in the evening, 3,000 of these battle-hardened veterans march past their emperor. Can you imagine that moment? The tension? They cross the corpse-strewn battlefield towards the Allied center. This is it. Everything depends on this charge. Wellington's redcoats, somehow still standing after hours of bombardment and assault, rise to meet them. They pour devastating volleys of musket fire into the Imperial Guard's ranks at point-blank range. When the Allies fix bayonets and prepare to charge, something unthinkable happens. The Imperial Guard wavers. Then they retreat. The Imperial Guard, retreating, it's like watching a myth die in real time. Wellington, sensing victory like a shark smelling blood, orders a general advance. About the same time, the Prussians recapture Plancenoit. News of the Imperial Guard's defeat and rumors of encirclement by the Prussians sweep through the French ranks like wildfire. Panic breaks out, complete utter panic. The French army flees the battlefield. It's not a retreat. It's a rout. Only Napoleon's Old Guard maintain their discipline, mounting a heroic but utterly doomed rearguard action. They form squares and fight to the death, covering the retreat of their comrades. The Guard dies but does not surrender, they're supposed to have said. Whether they actually did or not doesn't really matter. It sounds brilliant, and that's what counts. Napoleon himself is forced to abandon his carriage and barely escapes the pursuing Prussian cavalry. The man who'd conquered Europe is running for his life through the mud and darkness. The battle is won. Wellington and Blucher meet and congratulate each other outside Napoleon's former headquarters, an inn called La Belle Alliance. Blucher thinks it's the perfect name for their shared victory, a beautiful alliance, right? But Wellington prefers the more English-sounding Waterloo, where he has his own headquarters. And Wellington's the victor, so Wellington gets to name it. The Battle of Waterloo was, in Wellington's own words, a damned near-run thing. It was also one of the bloodiest battles of the age. Around 50,000 men were killed or wounded. Let that sink in, 50,000. In a single day. 23,000 coalition casualties, 27,000 French. Due to an appalling shortage of medical care, many of the wounded were left lying on the battlefield for several days. In the mud, in the heat, in their own blood. It's almost too horrific to imagine. Napoleon was utterly defeated. Unable to raise another army, with France exhausted and his enemies closing in from all sides, he surrendered to the British. They transported him to a second exile, this time on the tiny remote Atlantic island of St. Helena. It's literally in the middle of nowhere, thousands of miles from anywhere. This time there was no escape, no dramatic return. He died there 6 years later, probably of stomach cancer, though conspiracy theories abound. He was 51 years old. Waterloo marked the beginning of a period of relative peace in Europe. There were no wars between the great powers for 40 years. And the British wouldn't fight on the continent for another 100 years. Not until the summer of 1914, when a different kind of hell would break loose. 40 years after the battle, a pioneer in the new art of photography did something remarkable. He captured images of veterans from Napoleon's armies. By then, they were all old men in their 70s and 80s. Faces lined with age, eyes that had seen things we can barely imagine. Among them was Sergeant Tanya of the Imperial Guard, Moret of the 2nd Regiment of Hussars, Verlinde of the 2nd Guard Lancers. These faces are a tantalizing link to the dramatic events that shaped the course of history 2 centuries ago. When you look at those photographs, you're looking at men who stood in those squares. Who heard the cannon's thunder? Who saw Napoleon himself ride past? It's extraordinary, really. A bridge between their world and ours. So there you have it, Waterloo, the battle that ended Napoleon's 100 days, crushed his dreams of restoration, and changed the course of European history. A muddy field in Belgium where 50,000 men fell, where the Imperial Guard finally broke, where empires rose and fell in the space of a single bloody day. It was close. Desperately, terrifyingly close if Napoleon had started his attack earlier. If Grouchy had intercepted the Prussians, If the Imperial Guard had broken through, history could have been completely different. But they didn't, and it wasn't, and the world moved on. If you found this deep dive into one of history's most crucial battles as fascinating as I did researching it, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories from the past that shaped our present, and drop a comment below. What battle would you like to hear about next? Trafalgar? Hastings? Agincourt? Let me know. Cheers, and I'll catch you in the next one. Right, I'm off for a cup of tea. All this talk of battles has left me parched.